It is the first model introduced in the 2025 Grendizer U collaboration with Medarot S, sporting the likeness of the iconic UFO super robot himself. It is GDU00 Gren-D, with a mostly new kit of wide thundershot, power sword, ranged pile, biped legs, and a brand new leg ability of follow-up, which buffs the user's heat stat when targeting an opponent that cannot dodge. Now, it's become incredibly clear that Imagineer most certainly has friends in high places, going back from other collabs such as EVA, Mazen Kaiser, Shin Getter, Full Metal Panic. It's incredibly abundant that Imagineer has done in 5 years what other games like Super Robot Wars spend 30 titles doing. But that is most certainly of no complaint here, as we have yet another powerful super robot making their way into Medarot S and onto the battlefield to join the games. Wide Thundershot on the head part is a brand new skill being introduced into the game, but at the same time, it's honestly something we're kind of used to seeing already. And that is the fact that it's essentially just Thundershot, which is the ability to long-range ailment attack that will stun an enemy where they stand. But instead of it being just a regular attack or even something like Hyper Thundershot with piercing, Wide Thundershot is an AoE instead. So it will damage all parts of the target and equalize the damage across all of them, while also stunning them and temporarily immobilizing them in place just to buy yourself a few extra seconds of time. Power Sword on the right arm is a conventional melee skill that gets a times 1.5 damage bonus as long as the user's legs remain intact. So this is most certainly going to be one of Gren-D's more consistent forms of damage, given that very powerful scythe-like weapon that he brings on the field with him. And the difference is, if the legs are indeed broken at any given capacity, the times 1.5 damage modifier is lost and then becomes just a regular sword, which, even with the base power of 1632, isn't too shabby, but it's often better you keep those legs as a just in case, because that power amping up to almost 2400 without any modifiers is most certainly really hard to argue. Ranged Pile on the left arm is a new skill that we've started seeing more and more within recent developments. But simply explained, Ranged Pile is a very uniquely conditioned melee skill that can change its behaviors relative to the target it attacks and how close the target is to Gren-D. Explaining simply, when attacking a target that is close to Gren-D, it becomes more powerful with a damage plus and gains an AoE attribute, so it'll damage all parts like a hammer would. But instead, if you attack someone that is far away from Gren-D, the attack gains a success boost and gains piercing instead. So, in contrast to Power Sword, which is mostly very consistent in its base damage and overall performance, Range Pile is something that's going to kind of add an element of uncertainty to Gren-D's performance as a whole, because its overall conditions change relative to the proximity of the target. But given that it's got a relatively solid base power at 1478 before any other modifiers kick in, and a success at 1237, it's going to be pretty solid whether it gets that damage plus or that success plus, not even touching on the damage attributes of piercing or AoE. Biped legs means that Gren-D is going to have relatively solid coverage across most terrains pretty consistently, and his leg stats are actually quite impressive as well. With a base mobility of 910, he's already off to a very solid start in the speed department, so he's not going to need to rely on too much in terms of mobility or compensation or Medarot bonuses when it comes to keeping a high speed factor going. An evade of 1071 is nice as well, as this means he may not dodge or graze all the time, but the chance of him doing so relatively consistently is still there, relative of course to the compatibility of his legs on the terrain for that extra bonus. A melee resist of 1797, almost 1800, is very impressive though, as this means that he can most certainly hold his own up close and personal for people that try to get into his personal space. And a shoot resist of almost 1500 is just equally as so, as this is a super robot that can hold his own both at range and up close and keep himself at a very consistent overall performance and damage reduction across the field. When it comes to armor, he's just as bulky as well, with a head armor of just shy of 4500, a right arm of 4200, left arm at 3900, and legs at 4315. So with the exception of that left arm being just a little bit lighter on the armor compared to his other arm, head, or legs, he's still a very bulky model. And if you add those with his resist stats, which are just as equally impressive, this model is going to be really tough to take down unless you hit him really stupidly hard, because he's going to be able to tank most hits pretty consistently without going down or getting broken. All this being said, though, as a pure set score, I honestly have to rate Gren-D a very solid and well-rounded 8 out of 10. Despite the fact that his kit is relatively strange, especially with the inconsistency and high variety of ranged pile, it is incredibly synergetic unto itself. If you start off the fight with wide thundershot to stun an enemy on the field, the ability of follow-up will actually synergize exceptionally well, as it'll boost his heat stat when targeting this foe on his next turn. So not only are you stalling the foe to give yourself basically another turn for free, but you're also getting a speed bonus on top of that to follow through, or follow up in this case, pun intended, and guarantee that you're going to be punishing them with a very powerful 1-2 combo. And that can be paired with either Power Sword or Range Pile relatively easily, just as long as that condition of follow-up is met first, as long as you can hit an opponent with no dodge. And that no dodge doesn't have to be from Wide Thundershot, mind you. It can be from a cooldown penalty, it can be from an ailment such as Lock Shot or Deathlock. Anything that guarantees that the opponent cannot dodge, Gren-D gets a speed bonus out of it. As mixed parts, I do have to rate him equally at an 8 out of 10 for these same reasons. Because, again, as a pure set, he is incredibly synergetic as an all-rounder type of a hybrid melee shooting type, auxiliary shooting type of fighter, but also incredibly user-friendly on those same conditions. As mixed parts, or even more so, because you can use Wide Thundershot, Power Sword, or Range Pile basically anywhere, especially given that Range Pile is non-heavy, meaning you can stick it just about anywhere with no real issues. And the leg ability of follow-up is something that, while it does sound conditional, like I said, you can use it basically anywhere you're targeting somebody that is in a no-dodge penalty state. Again, that can be from a no-dodge penalty on cooldowns, to defend, to a evade seal, Lock Shot, Deathlock, whatever the case may be. As long as they can't dodge, you're going to get a speed bonus out of it.